Hello everyone and welcome back to Age of Nagash, which is a channel dedicated to Age of Sigmar, and in this video we're going to continue with our Beasts of Chaos army series as part of the Age of Sigmar army archive. So in this video it's going to be the first one actually looking at the individual unit war scrolls of the Beasts of Chaos, and in particular we are going to have a look at the Brayherd. So these are going to be things like your Zangors, Gors, Bestigors, Beast Lords, Great Bray Shamans. Also we're going to have a look at things like the Ezechian Beastmen as well, because they also go into the Brayherd keyword. Now before we go into the video, what I do want to say is, get out of the way, a Beast of Chaos is not the most competitive army out there. The whole point of these army series is to try and see what we can do with them, rather than just people saying that they're not any good. So now that we've got that aside, let us go on to our first war scroll. So what we're going to do is going to start from the lowest to the top. So we'll be starting with, of course, the Zangors. And on this channel we tend to review things with a very sort of like competitive focus, but what I am also going to do for people who care more about narrative, and it's what I usually do in these videos, is I will talk a little tiny bit of lore about each unit I'm going to review, just so we have a bit of understanding of how they work within the mortal realms. So Zangors are the smallest of the beastmen, with short stumpy horns and patchy manes. As the most man-like creatures of the Brayherds, they are regularly tormented and brutalized by their more fearsome kin, hunted for sport and forced to scavenge for scraps on the fringes of savage feasts. This breeds hatred and malevolence in the Zangors and forces them to gather in mass herds for survival. Together they skulk through the shadows, looking for prey upon whom they can unleash their bitter anger. Where other Beasts of Chaos are stronger, Zangors are incredibly dexterous, able to craft more delicate weapons and armour than others of their warped kind. As such, Zangors are tasked with cobbling together axes and shields for the other beasts, and even fashion simple bows that they can use to deadly effect. Okay, so now that we know a little bit about them in the lore, what do these guys do on the table? So what we can see is they're not the most superior of all the Beasts of Chaos, so let's not have our expectations too high. So looking at points, they're going to cost you 60 points for 10 models, and they can come in a max size unit of 40 for 200 points. So that means if you go the mass legion discount, you are going to get yourself 40 points knocked off if you go for the full 40 models in a unit. So they're going to be your battle line in generic chaos, but obviously especially in Beasts of Chaos, so they take up one of those 3 slots if you're taking a 2000 point army. So let us have a look at their rules. So firstly, starting with the stat wheel. They have a movement of 6 inches, they have a 6+ save, they have bravery 4, and they have 1 wound. So if I'm brutally honest here, the only alright thing is the movement of 6. It's not 4 or 5, and at least they have a save. Bearing in mind that they are 60 points for 10 models, which is not very common in the game. One of the other things I can think of off the top of my head are zombies, as a comparison, are 60 points for 10 models, so they haven't got too much competition for their points. So the next thing to look at is their description. So a unit of Zangors has any number of models. The unit is armed with one of the following weapon options: Zangor blade and half shield, or gnarled short spear and half shield. So the reason why I read the description first, rather than just going straight into the weapons, is now you know what they can be equipped with, and it's a lot more straightforward. The only other thing I want to say is that it did detail that you can have any number of models in this unit. That's if you're playing open or narrative, but like I said earlier, we tend to focus more on match play. So match play purposes, minimum 10, max of 40, and you can have it in, you know, blocks of 10, 20, 30 in between. So having a look at the melee weapons, we have got the Zangor blade first, range of 1 inch. It's got 1 attack, force hit, force a wound, no rend, and 1 damage. And then the gnarled short spear is a 2 inch range, 1 attack, 5 to hit, and force to wound, no rend, and 1 damage. So realistically here, it's going to depend on how you want to run this unit. If you want to take them in maximized units of 40 to make the most of that discount, I would give them spears. Yes, you're getting to hit on a 5 rather than a 4, but you've got that 2-inch range, so you will be able to get more and more into combat, so it would be better overall. However, if you're taking smaller units, I would go with the blade to get that effectively +1 to hit for the 4 to hit. And for me, myself, I would run them in small units. I'd probably run them in units of 10 if I was to take them, just to fill up battle line slots. Because to be honest, I personally believe there are better things in the book to take rather than the Zangors, but I want to review them anyway. But that's just my honest opinion. Okay, so going on to their abilities. So they get a half horn. So the leader of this unit is a half horn. Add 1 to the attack characteristics for half horn's Zangor's blade or gnarled short spear. You also get a Bray Horn, so 1 in every 10 models in this unit can have a Bray Horn. A unit that includes any Bray Horns can run and still charge later in the same turn. That is a very nice horn ability, and I will imagine it will be the same horn ability we'll see quite often with the Brayherds. So the next one you can get is a Banabera, so 1 in every 10 models in this unit can be a Banabera. A unit that includes any Banaberas can move an extra 1 inch when it runs or piles in. That's very interesting. Sometimes we see it when it runs, but pile in as well, so you can pile in up to 4 inches with these guys. Very useful. And then when we go on to the Probabilities, we have the Baying Hatred. So you can reroll hit rolls of 1 for attacks made by this unit while it has 20 or more models, or you can reroll hit rolls of 1 and 2 for attacks made by this unit while it has 30 or more models. So again, it's telling you if you want to go with the a big size unit blocks, you can take advantage of it and you are going to be rewarded for it. And then the half shields, so add 1 to save rolls for attacks made with melee weapons that target this unit. That's pretty good. So that means when you're in combat, which you want to be with these guys, unless they're just sitting on objectives or taking up board space, you've got to save a 5 up. So obviously against shooting, it's not going to be very useful, but these guys, unless they're being shot by the enemy probably doesn't have anything better to shoot at, which means other things have gone terribly, terribly, terribly wrong. And then finally, looking at their keywords, we've got Chaos, Beast of Chaos, Brayherd, and Zangors. So very straightforward there. Right. So my overall thoughts with the Zangors is, personally, I think there are better options in the book for not much more points to spend, shall we say. I don't think they're bad. I think if you want to take a lot of monsters in your list and everything like that, and you want to have a load of fun, go very elite, but you're sort of struggling to find battle line options, Zangors can be great for that, and not just in Beast of Chaos, to be honest, in all of Chaos. Because, well, I say all Chaos, I mean, Chaos Grand Alliance, really. Because they're so cheap. If you want to take, Hidden Knights of Slaanesh, and then you ally in the Slaanesh battalion, so all your Beast of Chaos get the Slaanesh keyword, so then they become part of the army, and you just want cheap battle lines, Zangors are your man. There are uses for them, but for me, they're just a bit too soft, because I will never be attacking first of these guys, which means I feel like the enemy's going to tear them to pieces. But they can be used to put a lot of bodies on the board and deny your opponent things like setting up for the board edge, being able to teleport around as you are just, taking up the real estate, essentially. And just one more thing I want to say at the start, because the first War Scroll reviewed, if you're not really understanding how to read a War Scroll, and that's absolutely fair enough if you're new and you find it a bit hard, I have done a video which is for War Scrolls for beginners that you can check out on the channel. If I'm clever enough, I'll try and have it come up around now at the top of the screen. Okay, so with the Zangors done, the next unit I want to move on to, taking great leaps here, is going to be Zangor Raiders. So you may be thinking, I've just reviewed the Zangors. These are the ones equipped with the bows, like we've mentioned in the lore before. Okay, so a little bit of lore for them. What Zangor Raiders are lacking strength, they make up for in cruel cunning. They are the most manlike of all beasts of chaos, and with their wicked bows, they rain deadly hails of arrows down upon their enemies. So, looking at points for these guys, Zangor Raiders. So, they're going to cost you 80 points for 10. And you can take them in a max size unit of 40. And there's no discount here. And they're not battle line either. So, a couple of negatives there straight away compared to the normal Zangors. That's because these guys are a bit better. So, looking at their stat wheel, first off, It's a 6-inch movement, a 6+ save, 4 bravery and 1 wound, so exactly what we've seen before for the Zangors. But what they get, as we'll read the description, is a unit of Zangors has any number of models. Each is armed with a raider bow and a jagged shank. So the big thing here is the missile weapons. So the raider bow, so 18-inch range, force to hit, force to wound, no rend, and 1 damage. And that might not seem, amazing and remarkable, but bear in mind that this is still a cheap unit for 10 for 80. You can get quite a few shots off. So we will then go on to the melee weapons. So this is a 1-inch range, 1 attack, 5 hit, 5 wound, no rend, 1 damage. Quite frankly, for a shooting unit of this kind of strength, to have a melee weapon, just be glad it's not 6s to hit and 6s to wound. And then going on to their abilities. So they have a half horn, which is you add 1 to the hit rolls for attacks made with a half horn's raider bow. So it hits on a 3 instead of a 4. And then we have a Bray Horn, and then this is why it is still important to differentiate what a Bray Horn means for Zangors and Zangor Raiders, because the Bray Horn for these guys is 1 in every 10 models in this unit can have a Bray Horn. A unit that includes any Bray Horns that can run and still shoot later in the same turn. So not run and charge, run and shoot, which makes these guys better because they've got a movement of 6, right? So that gives their shooting a 24-inch threat range because they have movement 6 and a range of their bow of 18. So 6 plus 18 is 24. However, with this, now that is 24 plus d6, which you could make automatically a 6 for a command point if you had a hero nearby. So then that could be a threat range of 30 inches straight away. And I know that's, again, use things, like the perfect situation to be able to do that, but, it is there. So suddenly their range doesn't look so bad. Okay, and then Banabera. So this is a 1 in every 10 models in this unit can be a Banabera. A unit that includes any Banaberas can move an extra 1 inch when it runs or piles in. So like we said, it can now have a threat range of 31. And the reason why I've read it again, although it was the same as just the normal Zangors, is because the Bray Horn wasn't. So remember, it's always useful just to have a double check. So going on to the real abilities, we have Vial Invaders. So after armies have been set up before the first battle round begins, this unit can move up to 6 inches. So firstly, straight away, you're making yourself be able to shoot the enemy on turn 1, particularly if you go first, you can do it before the enemy can react to it. And then the last ability we have is Bay in Anger. So you can reroll hit rolls of 1 for attacks made by this unit with missile weapons while it has 20 or more models. Or reroll hit rolls of 1 and 2 for attacks made by this unit with missile weapons while it has 30 or more models. So very similar to what we saw the normal Zangors, but obviously these guys are a missile unit, so it's with their bow. And that is where their shooting becomes more reliable, as just a 1 attack, force hit, force to wound, like I mentioned earlier. It's nothing amazing. Even with rerolls, it's not like one of the best shootings out there. However, like I say, it makes it more reliable, which means you can count on them to do that damage you need them to from afar. And then keywords, they have Chaos, Zangor, Beasts of Chaos, Brayherd, and Zangor Raiders. So my overall thoughts on these guys. Whereas I said with the Zangors, personally, I wouldn't take them unless I just want to spend the least as possible on battle line. But with these Zangor Raiders, I would consider taking them for sure. They're not a bad missile unit. They're not, like I say, outstanding, but they're not bad. And they have some sneaky tricks like running and still being able to shoot later, which most shooting units in the game do not have that ability. So that's quite unique to them. Those rerolls are very useful. So if I was to take them, unless I was just using them as very light skirmishers, I would take them in big size units. I would consider taking 40 just to make the most of those rerolls, getting rerolls of 2s to hit as well. But it does then become difficult to be more finesse with them in targeting the enemy, because it's just a big block to try and move around to hit the enemy unit what you want. But then again, these guys are then taking up board space. If you did have a unit of 40 of them, that would cost you 320 points, which is I'm on an iron here because it's quite hard to justify that. That's a lot of a point sink into a averagely good shooting unit. It was something I would want to proxy first and try out before I could give you my official opinion, as I don't play this army after all. I'm only looking at it from an outsider's point of view, but I think they are definitely worth proxying to see if it could work. It's like I say, a big block of shooting to move around, but then again it takes up board space like the Zangors did. So if I think a better way to do it is compare them to normal Zangors. These guys are not battle line, so normal Zangors have that over them. But as terms of units, these Zangor Raiders are worth the extra 20 points over normal Zangors. And with that, I think we can move on from the Zangors, and we're going to upgrade ourselves to just the Gors. So Gors are essentially Zangors, but a bit tougher, a different sort of beast within the Beast of Chaos, if you will. It's like the next level up. So before we dive into their rules, let us have a look at their lore. So the Gors, the larger of the two beastman breeds. Gors stand taller than most men and are considerably stronger. On powerful legs they charge across a battlefield, closing upon their prey with terrifying speed before hacking them apart with crudely made axes and brutal spiked implements. Even unarmed, the wolf-like fangs and long curling horns of Gors make them ferocious killers. Each Gor herd is fronted by a foe render, typically the beast with the largest horns or the thickest mane, who leads its warriors kin by violent example, mauling opponents without mercy to the sound of bloodthirsty braying. Some Gor herds carry Bray Horns, using them to add to the sound of battle, as well as banners made of flayed skin or filth-encrusted pelts, the stench of which stokes the creature's lust for slaughter and anarchy. And now we know a bit about the Gors, let's see what they're like on the tabletop. So firstly, Gors, they are battle line in the army. You can have 10 in a unit for 70 points, or you can have 30 in a unit for 200 points. So you do get a Legion discount, but you do only get like 10 points knocked off, which is, I think, the lowest discount you can get, unless there's an example of like a Legion discount of 5 points, but I severely doubt it. However, it's still a discount at the end of the day. You can only have 30 in a unit compared to the Zangors, which you could have 40. So, how do they look? So their will stats have a 6-inch movement, a 5+ save, a bravery 5 and 1 wound. So comparing them to the Zangors, they have a +1 bravery and +1 save so far. And then looking at the description, it says a unit of Gors has any number of models. The unit is armed with one of the following weapon options: Gore Blade and a Beast Shield, or pair of Gore Blades. So already we can see there's going to be like a defensive option and an offensive option. So looking at the melee weapon, we've got the Gore Blades, or Blades depending if you go dual. So 1-inch range, 1 attack, force to hit, force to wound, no rend, 1 damage. If I could do the most sort of like standard attack in Age of Sigmar off the top of my head, that would be it. Nothing bad, but nothing really good. Hitting and winning forwards. But they're cheap, aren't they? You got 10 bodies here for 70 points, which is very cheap, so I can't really complain. What are we going to get then in the abilities? So you have a foe render. So the leader of this unit is a foe render. Add 1 to the attack characteristics of foe render's Gore Blades. I presume that means it matches its bigger horns and its wolf teeth, like mentioned in the lore. And the Bray Horn, so 1 in every 10 models in this unit can have a Bray Horn. A unit that includes any Bray Horns can run and still charge later in the same turn. So again, like we saw for the Bray Horn for the normal Zangors. Then they have a Banabera. So again, this is very standard. It gives you the extra 1 inch for when you run or pile in. And then going on to the probabilities, first one is Rend and Tear. So you can reroll hit rolls of 1 for attacks made with a pair of Gore Blades. And then going on to the Beast Shields, you can add 1 to save rolls for attacks made with melee weapons that target a unit with Beast Shields. And then you've got Anarchy and Mayhem. So add 1 to the attack characteristics of this unit's melee weapons while it has 20 or more models. So, with this unit, it's the first one we've really came across in this review where we make a choice. Do we go offensive or defensive? Now, when I always ask myself that question, you always have to bear in mind, what is the purpose of this unit? What is the purpose of the Gors? Are they going to be an anvil or are they going to be a hammer unit? And in all honesty, for me, I would say they would be more of an anvil. I would give them the shields. They would have a 4-up save. And then they would have mediocre attacks. If I gave them the twin axes, there would be re-roll hit rolls of 1. So that would help. And of course, you standardly add 1 to your attacks. You've got 20 or more in the unit, which would then give them 2 attacks each. So if we went offensively, 2 attacks each, and then you can reroll hit rolls of 1 for attacks made with a pair of Gore Blades. It's not enough for me, and I know there are additional ways you can buff them up, but for me, on a sort of like thinking about it, I would go Anvil. I think you have better things in this army, not just in Brayherds. We only are going to be looking at Brayherds today, but there are other things in this army, and to be fair, in Brayherds as well, that are more offensive than your Gors. Your Gors are going to be there for objective play. Your Gors are going to be there taking up space on the board and tying up any of the units. Does that mean then that Ungors are surely better than Gors because you can get them cheaper? I personally believe that Gors are better than Ungors because if you've got them in combat, they've got that 4-up save rather than a 5-up save, and for that price you are paying essentially another 10 points unless you go, mass legion discount. And that extra 10 points is worth it. In my opinion, of course, you might get to the end of your list and 10 points makes all the difference. But for me right now, that is what I'd focus them on more of an Anvil unit. Of course, throughout the review and the whole army series, my opinion could change. The more I read into this army, I could think differently. But currently, that is what I think. And to be honest, I feel like, as I've mentioned, there are better units in this army to be your hammers. And then just the last thing to say, so the keywords, they've got Chaos, Beast of Chaos, Brayherd and Gors. So very straightforward there. Okay, so the next unit I want to have a look at, again, a step up from your Gors. And this is going to be, surprise, surprise, a Bestigors. So firstly, a bit about the lore for the Bestigors. The strongest and meanest Gors carve out positions of great privilege within their beast herds. Known as Bestigors, they take for themselves the best spoils after battle, and during barbaric feasts, shove their way close to the herdstone to bask in its warping glow. These dominant creatures clad themselves in armour that they have ripped from the corpses of their enemies and wield massive two-handed axes that they use to assert themselves as apex despoilers. Bestigors are viewed with favour by beast lords and Bray shamans, who use them as bodyguards or afford their positions at the forefront of a stampede, where they can be the first creatures into combat. But a beast lord must be ever wary of their Bestigors, for inevitably the boldest of these creatures will mount a challenge to usurp their position as Alpha Beast. So looking to see what they do in the game. So they can be taken into unit sizes of 10 minimum for 120 points, or maximum size units of 30 for 300 points. And obviously you can take them in a unit of 20 if you would like to. So if you take them in a unit of 30, you're going to knock off 60 points off their total cost from the Legion discount, which is pretty damn good. I think the most you can get knocked off is 80, so that's pretty much as good as it gets, 60. They can be battle line in a Beast of Chaos army if the general is a Beast Lord or Great Bray Shaman. So like I say, although I'm dividing these videos into different races within the Beast of Chaos, that's not how you have to take the army, as I've explained in the Allegiance videos, which you can check out. But if you want to focus on one of those sort of aspects of the army, Brayherds, then you're probably going to make a Beast Lord or a Great Bray Shaman your general. which then unlocks these guys as your battle line. So just something to think of if you like the Bestigors. So with the Bestigors, looking at their will stat, they have a 6-inch movement, a 4+ save, bravery 6, and 1 wound. So if I'm completely honest with you guys, compared to the Gors, the young Gors, what we just looked at, they always just seem to be getting an extra +1 save, an extra +1 bravery, which I'm not arguing with. I think that's quite clever. It's a nice little, just like a little step up from the ones before them. As they've been fighting longer, you know, they're bigger, they're stronger, they're less scared. Okay, so looking at the description, it says a unit of Bestigors has any number of models, each armed with a despoiler axe. So very straightforward. And then the melee weapons, so the despoiler axe. So 1-inch range, 2 attacks, force to hit, 3 to wound, -1 rend, and 1 damage. So suddenly, much better than the last couple units we looked at, but they are more expensive in points, unsurprisingly. So going into their abilities, we have a Gouge Horn. So the leader of this unit is a Gouge Horn. Add 1 to the attack characteristics of a Gouge Horn's despoiler axe. Nice and straightforward. I always prefer it when it's add 1 to the attack characteristics rather than add 1 to hit, because then you can just roll the dice with all the others and it makes things a lot easier. And then we have the Bray Horn. So that lets these guys run and still charge later, like we've seen before. So that's very good. Again, like I said, if we want to make that run a natural 6, then that's just a movement of 12 and then a charge. And then, of course, with the Banabera, it gives you add 1 inch to your run and charge rolls. So that effectively is a 13-inch movement and then a charge. If you want to make that run roll an automatic 6 for the cost of a command point. Which, to be fair, for me anyway, from what I can see so for the army, there's not loads of things you want to save your command points for, from what I can see. So you may be using it to make those run rolls 6s, could be a good thing. So you may have some spare to do this. It's not something like, oh, you could do if then and then, but you're always going to want to use that command point for something else. You may have one spare. So, looking at the profitabilities, we have the spoilers. So, add 1 to hit rolls for attacks made by this unit that target enemy units with 10 or more models. In addition, you can reroll hit rolls of 1 for attacks made by this unit that target order units. Okay, so firstly, the fighting order, fantastic. But obviously, you can't guarantee that. The only thing I would say, with looking at a tournament ground, and I know things are still in lockdown, so it's not really tournaments, but Seraphon are very strong at the moment. From what we can see, Lumineth look like they're going to be strong. And then, of course, we do tend to find things like Idoneth Deepkin, Stormcast, Khaldun Overlords, Daughters of Cain, a few of those armies at tournaments. So you've got a good chance of coming across it. I would say if you're fighting a Destruction army, it wouldn't came up as much. But maybe that's changed now. Ogre tribes are out and Uruk Walkland. So maybe, but it's okay. Don't rely on the order thing, but it's not too bad. The main thing to focus on is add 1 to hit rolls if the enemy unit has 10 or more models. That says these guys are basically more aimed towards hordes. So you may be thinking that is wasting the rend they have on them, but if the horde has a bad save, you've just made their save, non-applicable essentially, or even worse. So their last ability is Bestial Charge, which is add 1 to the attack characteristics of this unit's melee weapons in a turn which it made a charge move. So again, here we're coming with saving the command point to make these guys move that extra 6 inches, because really that's an extra 7 inches onto their normal movement because they're getting that +1, aren't they, with their banner. So there's a movement of 13, and then obviously you can reroll the charge roll if you had, a command point, for example, to spend to do that. So these guys, what are my thoughts? Now, automatically, they're better than anything else we've looked before, but of course the Ungor Radius were shooting units, that's completely different. And the Ungor Radius, to be fair, with the other units, were a lot cheaper. So if we compare this to the most expensive other unit, would be the Ungor Radius, but like I say, that's a shooting unit. So the best thing to compare these two are the Gors. So you're paying an extra 50 points here compared to the Gors for 120 price tag. What do I think of that? I think if you looked at it from an external point of view, there are better things in this game that will cost you 120 points. But from an internal point of view, I have got a lot of love for the Bestigors. I think, especially if you're taking the maximum size units, so you really make the most out of them, I think they are good. They can suffer. You do need things to go off as well. And if you do take the maximum size units, you're not going to get, all of them fighting more often than not, but you do get a good saving of 60 points. So I would like to take them a maximized unit of 30. When I was talking about the Gors and I said you can make them offensive, but realistically, do you want to do that? I see them more of an anvil unit. I would see the Vestigors more of a hammer unit to do the damage. And particularly if you took them to fight enemy horde units, again, if you took 30 in this unit, you would be able to get most of them to fight and wrap around that horde block, you know, because it'll be quite big. And yeah, they could do quite well, and they could be an answer towards some order units as well. So their keywords are Chaos, Gore, Beast of Chaos, Brayherd, and Vestigors, very standard stuff. And my overall thoughts with them is I would consider taking them. I would definitely try them out. I like them personally, so I would take them to see how they do. Could do very well. But like I say, use them to clear the enemy horde units. That is their purpose. You have better things at taking out enemy elite units. Can these guys do it? They can do if they get to attack them first. But they've only got one wound. And you've got to be quite careful of them because they are quite squishy with a lot of things in this army. But you've got better things to deal with the enemy elite units, like I've said. Okay, so that is the Vestigors. And the next unit we're going to look at is going to be the Zangors. So I wanted originally to review all the Zeech units in this book in one go at the end of this video. However, I feel like the Zangors are the natural step up from the Vestigors, as they will be something you can compare them to. Firstly, a bit about the lore of the Zangors. Lying in hiding within mist-shrouded woods or concealed by mirage like illusions, flocks of Zangors watch their enemies and wait for the time to strike. At the ordained moment, their charge is announced with strange trilling calls, the clacking of avian tongues, and Bray Horn blasts that sunder the sanity of those in earshot. The bestial creatures strive forward, brandishing savage blades, their piercing eyes lining up prey to be slaughtered in glorious and savage tribute to Zeech. Zangors are possessed of far greater intelligence than their other beastmen, and look down upon those creatures as unevolved brutes. Yet their lofty opinion of themselves is well deserved, for in single combat a Zangor is more than a match for many of its bestial cousins. Where most beasts of chaos rely on strength and ferocity alone to overcome their enemies, Zangors employ deception and trickery and outmaneuver their enemies before ferociously hacking them apart with ornate weapons. The strangely mutated minds of Zangors are drawn towards magic. They aggressively seek out flows of arcane energy, devouring the flesh of mages so that it can be regurgitated at the base of flux cairns, and hoarding enscrolled artifacts so that they can be given an offering to Zeech. Zangors are also keenly tuned to the winding strands of fate, indistinctly track the paths of certain futures so that they can be brought into being through acts of scheming. Those Zangors who serve Zeech well in these regards are given further gifts of mutation, their bodies metamorphing and their savage potency increasing, with the most blessed being elevated to the ranks of Sky Fires or the Enlightened. But now we know who the Zangors are, let's see what they like in game. So Zangors, you got 10 in a minimal sized unit, and then you can take 30 in a maximum size unit, and it will cost you 180 points for 10 of these. And there is no discount for taking the max size unit of 30, no Legion discount. I believe that's a new thing with the General's Handbook 2020, I think. And so that separates them from some of the other units we've looked at so far. As I said, I'll be comparing them a bit to the Vestigors with this. But with that expensive price tag, having a look at their rules. So firstly, to have a look at their will stats. So they got a 6-inch movement, a 5+ save, 5 bravery, and 2 wounds. So with the 2 wounds there, compared to the Bestigors, it's double their wounds. It's almost like each one of them is worth 2 Bestigors in terms of survivability, I guess. Not in terms of objective play, of course. So with that, let's have a look at their description. So a unit of Zangors has any number of models, each armed with a vicious beak. In addition, each model in this unit is armed with one of the following weapon options: pair of Savage Blades or Savage Blade and Arcane Shield. 2 in every 5 models can replace their weapon option with a Savage Great Blade. Okay, so sometimes in some units you'll see 1 in 5, 1 in 10 can replace their weapon with a Gore Cleaver or something like that, or a Great Blade. There's very few occasions. However, with the Zangors, it gets to a point where the majority of models in your unit are special. They're not the standard ones. The standard ones will have the shields. So, as we see, to negate wounds later on, but you will be having a lot of specialist guys in this unit, so you need to keep on track on who is attacking with what and what abilities do they have. So looking at the melee weapons, so the Savage Blade or Blades, depending on how you equip them. So we've got a 1-inch range, 2 attacks, force hit, force wound, no rend, and 1 damage. And then we have the Savage Great Blade, which is 1-inch range, 1 attack, force hit, force wound, -1 rend, and 2 damage. And then we have the Vicious Beak, which is a 1-inch range, 1 attack, force hit, 5 wound, no rend, and 1 damage. And of course they all get that. So looking at those, obviously the Great Blade is a 2 damage weapon, and normally you would go, well, only like the specialist guy can take this, so there's no point really factoring in too much. 2 and 5 models can take this. So if you want to take a unit of 30 of these guys, that'll be 6 guys with this weapon, so that'll be 12 attacks with it. So then that's worth factoring in at that point. Okay, and then when we go into the abilities and more on the description side of things, it then goes into all the specialist models you can have in this unit. So we know that you can have 2 in every 5 can have that big old Savage Great Blade, but you also can have a Zangor Mutant. 1 in every 5 models can be one, and he is armed with a pair of Savage Blades and a Vicious Beak, and it adds 1 to the attack characteristics of a Zangor's Mutant pair of Savage Blades. Okay, so that's something to bear in mind. So again, in 5 models we've got so far 2 Great Blades and we have 1 Mutant. So we only then have 2 models that are standard. So again, with the Mutant, you're going to have 6 of them in your unit of 30. So that's why it's worth remembering them. Get some different dice. We then have a Twist Spray. So the leader of this unit is a Twist Spray. Add 1 to the hit rolls for attacks made with a Twist Spray's melee weapons. So that's worth remembering as well. I just wish it was an extra attack, but just +1 to hit, so something else to remember. And then you have the Icon Bearer. So 1 in every 10 models in this unit can be an Icon Bearer. While this unit has any Icon Bearers, it can use the Ornate Totems ability, which we'll get to in a moment. And then we have the Bray Horn. So 1 in every 10 models in this unit can have a Bray Horn. A unit that includes any Bray Horns can run and still charge later in the same turn. So quite a few special models. Now I know I've keep repeating that, but literally this is the big example of unit that I've seen on the battlefield where they just have so many different models in the unit that do different things. Okay, so then going on to the Profitability. So we've got add 1 to wound rolls for attacks made by this unit with melee weapons while this unit is wholly within 12 inches any friendly Arcanite hero. So if you're wondering what's an Arcanite hero, can't really see many examples in this book. Essentially, it's going to be your Zangor Shaman. Which means if you're taking these guys, you want a Zangor Shaman. Something I forgot to mention at the start reviewing this unit. If you take a Zangor Shaman as your general in this army, your Zangors will then become battle line. So that's a way to introduce them to your army in a more easy way if you like to. And it goes hand in hand if you're taking a lot of these guys. So add 1 to the wound rolls, which is good because you're wounded on, apart from the Vicious Beak, which is 5, you're usually wounded on 4s, so now you're wounded on 3s. Then you have the Arcanite Shield. So roll a dice each time you allocate a wound or mortal wound to a friendly Zangor unit that has any models armed with an Arcanite Shield. On a 6+, that wound or mortal wound is negated. That's definitely a good thing to have to try and avert that damage. You do standardly only have a 5-up save these guys, whereas if we looked at the Bestigors, they're the 4-up, didn't they? So you want to factor in, yes, these guys are killy, but you want to make sure they survive. So we then go on to pair Savage Blades, so add 1 to the hit rolls for attacks made by a model with a pair of Savage Blades. So like I said, I'd go the shield over the pair just because I think you want that survivability. You've got all your special models in the unit to do the damage, and the normal models are chucking out 2 attacks anyway, so it's pretty good to be fair. But where this gets interesting is when we looked at the mutant, they add 1 to the attack characteristics of their Savage Blades, and they also have a pair of them. So there would be 3 attacks each of them hitting on 3s, which is pretty good. And if you had the Twist Bray with a pair of Savage Blades, he would then be hitting on 2s. Okay, and then moving on to the next ability, which is Savagery Unleashed, which is add 1 to attack characteristics of this unit's melee weapons if this unit has at least 9 models when the attacks are being made. Essentially, Zeech's lucky number is 9, so multiples of 9, here we go. So that's where it also encourages taking bigger units, and it is going to be a big point sink. 10 of these guys is 180 points. So if my quick maths is right, then that would be 30 of these guys is 540 points, I believe, off the top of my head. So that's a lot of points. Unless you really, really, really want to, you're not going to be spanning multiple units of these Zangors. So just something to bear in mind, but to be fair, you get it anyway just with 10, as long as they haven't basically sustained more than 1 casualty so far. But added 1 to the attack characteristics, that'll greatly help out your Zangor mutants, who, like we said, you've got 6 in a unit of 30, and then that will mean that they make 3 attacks each. They're already hitting on 3s, and then this has given them 4 attacks each, hitting on 3s. Pretty good stuff. Okay, and then the next ability we have is the Ornate Totem. So while this unit has 1 or more icon bearers at the start of your hero phase, you can pick an enemy unit within 18 inches of this unit and is visible to them. Then roll a number of dice equal to the number of wizards units that are within 9 inches of this unit. For each 4 plus, that enemy unit suffers 1 mortal wound. Okay, so with this I'm going to say it's not very reliable. You could play and there's not really many wizards on the board, or not many wizards within 9 inches of these guys. Or you could play and there happens to be a lot of wizards that end up within 9 inches of these guys, and then it's pretty good. But on average, I'd say you do maybe 1 mortal wound. Maybe. And then looking at the keywords, we've got Chaos, Gore, Beast of Chaos, Brayherd, Zeech, Arcanite, and Zangors. And you wonder why they got Arcanite, because of course these have been imported over from the standard disciples of Zeech. But the Zangors, as well as we look at the other units, they do work in Beast of Chaos. Obviously, they're in the book and they have all the keywords that are needed. So I think they are a pretty solid unit, to be fair. They can dish out a load of attacks. They've got 2 wounds, which isn't very common in this army, especially for your Gore units. But if I was to compare them to Bestigors, what I will say is, like I said, 30 of these is going to cost you 540 points. 30 Bestigors is going to cost you 300 points. So these guys are 240 points more than a 30-man unit of Bestigors. Now you could say these guys got double the wounds, everything like that, and the extra save that the Zangors get with the shield sort of puts them on par with a 4+ save of the Bestigors, but I would argue with that one. I think my head says Zangors are probably better overall, and I'm sure there's people who know this army better than I do who are shouting at the screen saying Zangors are obviously the choice. Why even comparing them to Bestigors? You don't take Bestigors. I don't know, but for me, my heart says Bestigors. I think Bestigors can be very good at the job given to them, which is against Horde units. They can cut through them pretty nicely. Zangors, I feel like they can do that very well, but they're a bit overqualified. You could probably send these guys against more targets, but I think Bestigors for Hordes, and then other things we'll look at like Zangor Enlightened and so on for stuff that is against those big elite units. And not just Zangor Enlightened, I'm just going to be looking at the video, but you know, like Bulgors and Dragon Ogres and stuff. So, yeah, for me personally, I'm going Bestigors, because also I think they look pretty cool. Zangors are, you know, nice as well, but I like the older models of the Bestigors. But that's just a personal opinion. I think Bestigors are worth a go, but my head thinks Zangors are overall the better option. But I think if you target the Bestigors against those Horde units, you'll probably get better value for your points spent. Okay, so with that one out of the way, we're then going to have a look at a few interesting units. And I say interesting because this is when we're going to start looking at some of the more rarer units in this army. And to start with that, we are going to have a look at the Centaurs. And we'll start by looking at their lore. So Centaurs are hulking creatures with the muscular torso of a beastman and the lower body of a four-legged animal. They charge across the battlefield in haphazard formations, bearing down upon the front lines or tearing around to outflank their enemies. And with crude spears carried in man-like hands, they crash recklessly into their prey. Iron tips plunge into flesh and burst through rib cages. Shield walls crumble and impaled mounts are staked to the ground. As the foes reel under the weight of the impact, the Centaurs rear back, mauling their clawed forelimbs as they prepare to lunge again with their spears. So they sound like a lovely bunch of guys. Right, okay, then looking to see what they're like in the game. So Centaurs are... Firstly, I'll let's say some good points about them, because I know a lot of people don't say much good stuff about them. They are only going to cost you 80 points for 5. They can come in a max size unit of 20. There is no discount, and they're not battle line. They're just other unit. So, looking at the wheel stats for the Centaurs, and we start with basically the best thing about them. They have a 14-inch movement, which is really good. This is already a fast army. That's just made it faster. They have 5+ save. They have 5 bravery and 2 wounds. Then looking at the description, it says a unit of Centaurs has any number of models, each armed with a Centaur spear and a beast buckler and clawed forelimbs. So, at the melee weapons, they have the Centaur spear, which is a 2-inch range, 2 attacks, force to hit, force to win, no rend, 1 damage. And then the clawed forelimbs is just a 1-inch range, 2 attacks, 5 to hit, 5 to wound, no rend, and 1 damage. So, Centaur spears are alright, nothing special about it. It's got 2 attacks, basically the best thing. And it's got the 2-inch range. And then the forelimbs, I would say they're like normal horse attacks, but usually horses like hit on a 5 and win on a 4, or vice versa. But in this case, it's 5s and 5s all round. So, going on to the abilities unit. So we have the Gorehoof. So the leader of this unit is a Gorehoof. Add 1 to the attack characteristics of a Gorehoof's Centaur spear. That's good. Like I say, you don't have to roll your dice all separately then. And then the Bray Horn. So 1 in every 5 models in this unit can have a Bray Horn. A unit that includes any Bray Horns can run and charge later in the same turn. So like we've seen before. So these guys, if you wanted them to, you can make them move 20 because you can make the run a 6. And then you can make that 21 because their banner actually gives you +1 to run and +1 inch as well to pile in like we've seen before. So you can make these guys move 20 or 1 inches and then charge. Okay, and then going on to the abilities. So add 1 to save rolls for attacks made with melee weapons that target a unit with beast bucklers. So in combat effects, like we've seen before, they have a 4-up save. And going on to their charge and spear ability, so you can reroll failed wound rolls for attacks made with this unit's Centaur spears if it made a charge move in the same turn. And then the next one, Drunken Rivalry. So at the start of your hero phase, you can say that this unit is drinking wildly. If you do so until your next hero phase, add 1 to hit rolls for attacks made by this unit and for attacks that target this unit. So that's kind of a double-edged sword. And then the keywords, they've got Chaos, Beast of Chaos, Brayherd, and Centaurs. Okay, so what do I think about these guys? Now, a lot of people don't think really anything about them. However, my personal thoughts is these are not combat effective. These are literally, if you want to have something to be able to get behind the enemy lines quite late in the game because of their fantastic movement, to take an objective, that's what these guys are. They're objective grabbers. They're not for combat. If these guys get in a fight with anything that's not a credible basic unit, these guys will die. And you will be using them wrong. They have to be used for objective play. Otherwise, that's the stuff the Beast of Chaos book. It's a case of there are some units in this book that are just flat out not good. But there are also cases of units that people will say they're no good, but that's because people are using them, quite frankly, wrong to try and get a job. Like some people I know have tried to use Zangors to be a very, very offensive unit, and it just doesn't work. Overall, if they get the charge and you've got enough of them, they can chuck quite a few attacks out. But, you know, they're not going to do the job that other things in this book could do better at killing enemy units. They're not a hammer, they're not an anvil, they are objective grabbers. They are about speed and agility. And then another unit that is not commonly seen on a table is going to be the Tuscore Chariots. So I'll talk a little bit about their lore and then we'll look to see what they're like in the game. The Chariots of the Beastmen are ramshackle constructions built from heavy pieces of lumber and iron scourge from the ruins of despoiled cities, bound by tattered leather straps or the skin of slain enemies and monstrosities, and with huge spikes holding together the crudely shorn cross beams. These vehicles show no sign of finesse in their craftsmanship, but they are sturdy enough to carry their riders to the front line and deliver a devastating impact upon arrival. Each chariot is lashed to a pair of Tuscores, grotesque many-horned beasts that roam the chaos-infused wilds. Drawn by these creatures, the Tuscore Chariots rumbles into battle, the loud braying of its beastman crew rising above the pounding of hooves and the clatter of uneven wheels. With a whip and spear, the gore driver lashes and prods the Tuscores onwards, while the Vestigores at the chariot's rear holds up aloft its great axe, preparing to lop off heads the moment the vehicle reaches the enemy. Then having a look at this thing in game, firstly looking at its points. Now the best thing about this thing is it's pretty cheap, so you can take a minimum size unit of 1 or a maximum size unit of 4. 1 is going to cost you 60 points, but if you're taking a unit of 4, it's going to cost you 200 points, so you'll get yourself a discount of 40 points there, and they're not Battle Line or Behemoth, they're just other unit. And then moving on to their War Scroll, so they've got a 10-inch movement, a 4+ save, Bravery 6 and 6 wounds. Looking at the description, a unit of Tuscore Chariots has any number of models. Each Tuscore Chariot has a crew of 1 Bestigor and 1 Gore. The Bestigor is armed with a Despoiler Axe and the Gore is armed with a Gnarled Spear. So looking at the melee weapons, 1-inch range for the Despoiler Axe. It's got 2 attacks, force the hit, freeze the wound, -1 random, 1 damage. So, you know, it's basically a Beastigor attack, of course. Then you've got the Gnarled Spear, so a 2-inch range, 1 attack, force hit, force the wound, no rend, and 1 damage. That's good. And then the Gnarled Spear, so 2-inch range, 1 attack, force the hit, force the wound, no rend, and 1 damage. So yeah, pretty standard. And then the Tuscan Hooves, so this is a 1-inch range, 4 attacks, force the hit, freeze the wound, no rend, and 1 damage. Acceptable. And then it goes on to say that mounts for this unit's Tuscore attacks with their Tuscan Hooves. So just saying it's for those purposes, this basically the Tuscan Hooves are a mount attack. And then going on to the Profitabilities, we've got the Tuscore Charge, so you can reroll charge rolls for this unit. In addition, add 1 to the attack characteristics of this unit's melee weapons in a turn in which you made a charge move. That's pretty cool. And then the Spoilers, so add 1 to the hit rolls for attacks made with a Despoiler's Axe that target enemy units with 10 or more models. In addition, you can reroll hit rolls for 1 for attacks made with a Despoiler Axe that target order units. Okay, yes, that's what we've seen before, the Bestigors. Okay, so my overall thoughts of these, and I'll quickly read their keywords, is Chaos Score, Beast of Chaos, Brayherd, Tuscore, Chariot. Cool. On to my thoughts. I like this unit. A lot of people do not like this unit. I will tell you the reasons I like it. Similar to the Centaurs that we looked at, it's not because of its combat capability. It's not because of its survivable capability. I like this unit because it is good at being fast to take up board space. You can use this guy as someone to, because he's on a chariot base, which are fairly big bases, to try and block enemy movement or tie up enemy units, you know, either side, sort of, you know, pin them. I think these guys can do well because they're so cheap. They're 60 points for one. And I know when you're building a very competitive piece of Chaos List, to be fair, you may get to a point. I haven't got 60 points just to fucking spend on this to go and fucking try and do something useful and earn its points. But I very much like these. Almost like them, case of, I know with endless spells you can't, you know, attack them as such, but the great thing about them is sort of like denying your enemy movement by blocking things. You can do so again with a Tuscore Chariot, because the enemy's not going to really want to target the Tuscore Chariot, because again, like most players, they'll see them as trash and they'll rather attack your better units. So, you know, they're pretty safe. They got a 4-up save as well, which, to be fair, I was expecting a 5-up save, so 4-up save is pretty good. And then you can reroll charge rolls, which is great if you want to try and get those pins, but you don't want to spend a command point to reroll. So yes, controversially, I like the Tuscore Chariots for their purpose of being effective game pieces, not just killing an enemy, because they can't do that. If you charge these guys into the enemy to try and do damage, you will be disappointed. Use them to be a pain in your enemy's arse. That's really all these guys can do. And they're also fast as well, which is good. However, because they can't run in charge, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are much faster than most of the other units in this army because of the Bray Horn ability. Okay, now that we have looked at a couple units, I say they're not the most exciting, but you use them to be clever game pieces within your games. Now let's look at something that's a bit more spicy, which are going to be Zangor Enlightened. So about this unit, you can take it on a disc or off discs. I'll be reviewing it all as in one unit, and I'll tell you the various options. It'll be silly just to go over it twice for no other reason. But firstly, like before, let us have a look at the lore for the Zangor Enlightened. So, Zangor Enlightened possess a strange ability to perceive echoes of past events manifested around them. In battle, this allows them to see the hidden secrets and unspoken fears of their enemies brought to life. Many foes are driven mad as the squawking tongues of the enlightened retell buried tales of betrayal, repeat and dying words of loved ones, or loudly announce those self-doubts one only whispers when alone. As hatreds and jealousies are divulged, some warriors even turn upon their own allies, striking them down for slights that have been laid bare by Zechian beasts. This same vision allows the enlightened to see their enemies ever more repeated, each misplaced step and unbalanced weapon swing, played out again and again. In a split second they gain more knowledge of their foes than a predator gains in weeks of stalking its prey. Lunging forwards with spears wrought of changed metal, the enlightened target those opponents they know to be the weakest, stabbing where a poorly balanced shield, niggling injury, or unjustified sense of confidence precludes foe from mounting any form of defense. So now we know who they are, let's have a look to see what they are like in the game. So, Zangor Enlightened. Firstly, there are two different point costs for the Zangor Enlightened, depending if you want to take them on a disc or not. So, firstly, off the disc, you get 3 models for 100 points, and you can take a maximized unit of 9 models for 300 points, of course, but there is no discount there, and they are not battle line. If you want to take them on the disc, it's essentially going to cost you an extra 80 points, as you can take 3 for 180 points. And again, there is no Legion discount and no battle line. Then having a look to see what they're like in the game. So, looking at their stat wheel, without a disc, they are movement 6. Then they have a 5-up save, a bravery of 6, and 3 wounds. Then looking at the description, it says, a unit of Zangor Enlightened has any number of models, each armed with a Zechian spear and ferocious beak. It then tells us about the mount. So this unit can be mounted on discs of Zeech. If it is the unit has the demon keyword and a wounds characteristic of 4 instead of 3, a move characteristic of 16 instead of 6, and can fly. Discs of Zeech attacks with their teeth and horns. So there we go, there's the trade-off. So, you know, for an extra 80 points, what you're paying for is an extra wound and an extra 10 to your movement. And you're also going to get an extra attack, which is pretty good, we'll look at in a moment. So, going on to those attacks with the melee weapons. The Zeechian Spear, so this is a 2-inch range, 3 attacks, force hit, 3 wound, -1 rend, 1 damage. The Vicious Beak, which is 1-inch range, 1 attack, force hit, 5 wound, no render, 1 damage. And then the Teeth and Horns, which is from the disc, if you choose to go with the disc, is 1-inch range, D3 attacks, force to hit, 3 wound, -1 rend, and D3 damage. So with the Teeth and Horns, as swinging is all hell, but it can do a lot of damage. So, what are my thoughts so far about them? It's a case for me, honestly, if you have got the spare 80 points to spend to give these guys their discs of Zeech to be mounted upon, do it. They get the extra movement, and movement is how you win your games. And they become more offensive and more survivable with those 4 wins. Okay, and then going on to their abilities, we've got the Babbling Stream of Secrets. So, if an enemy unit fails a battleshock test within 9 inches of any friendly Zangor Enlightened units, add 1 to the number of models that flee. That's not right ability, but, you know, unless you're going towards that bravery bomb, it's you're not always going to see the most use of it, but it's one of those things, if you know an enemy will more than likely fail battleshock, and it could be an enemy unit that is, let's say, Gore Grunters, a more informed pack, you know, or Brutes. I'm just trying to think of, you know, where it's a case of a model flees from battleshock, it's not just a 1 wound model, it's actually something very big and impactful. Then have these guys nearby potentially to make sure that the enemy really regrets not using that as Divine Presence. Right, okay, and then the next ability and last ability is Guided by the Past. So this is kind of what we saw in the lore. And this is, in the combat phase, you can reroll hit rolls and wound rolls for attacks made by this unit if 1 or more enemy units within 3 inches of this unit have already fought in that phase. Okay, so this is good, because that means that if you really want to attack something else in your army, and you're looking at these and you think, oh, they probably won't take too much damage, but, you know, I want to make the most of them. You know, if you lose one of these guys, at least, you know, they'll be able to reroll failed hit and wound rolls, which is pretty damn effective. You know, even if you lose one, it may be worth the cost if you wanted to attack with something else. And the other important thing to say about the Guided by the Past doesn't mean that an enemy unit has to attack them. There could be an enemy unit right on the edge of your Zangor Enlightened who's attacking something else, let's say one of your characters, and then they fight, but because they happen to be within 3 inches of your Zangor Enlightened, they are going to get the benefit. Okay, and then with the keywords, we've got Chaos Score, Beast of Chaos, Brayherd, Zeech, Arcanite, Zangor Enlightened. So, like I said, you can spend the extra 80 points, spend the extra points on getting these guys. And then that really then becomes, are they worth the 180 points for 3 of them? These guys can be very good at taking out enemy characters hiding at the back because of their fantastic movement. They can do that, and because of their combat effectiveness, they're pretty good at that as well. Are they as good as some of the other horrendous things in this game in combat? You know, can you send these guys up against Terrorgeist to kill them, as an example, or Keepers of Secrets? You can give it a go, but you're probably going to come out a lot worse, to be honest, unless you're very lucky with your dice. These can be used against, like, elite enemy infantry. These can be used for taking down more elite stuff than the Bestigors, I would say, because that 2 damage. And really what I'd use them as, like, assassin squads going around the backfield. Units of 3 attacking enemy like characters at the back, or enemy like if they've just left like 6 1-wound models holding a back objective, these guys will go and sort them out with no problems at all. So yeah, that's my thoughts on them. And then if you're wondering, is there any point taking them in a unit of 3 without discs, as I keep on referring to, basically take the discs. The discs are ultimately better, make these guys a lot better and are worth the extra points in comparison, but on foot, they're still good, you know, and you're still getting a lot of stuff out of them, but you are losing the speed, which then takes away the tactic I said about taking away those enemy characters, and then it becomes, these guys make good hitters, behind your front line. And they could do. You could do that. They've got the 2-inch range in the weapon, so they can lean over your Zangors as an example, for sure. I think for me, I'd need to test that out to be completely convinced that they are worth taking, if not on the disc. But for me, 180 points for them on the disc, yeah, they can be pretty good. Okay, so with that, we are going to move on to a very similar unit again, but this time it is going to be Zangor Sky Fires, which is a direct comparison to the Enlightened, as you can choose which one you want to build when you buy the box. Alright, so with the Zangor Sky Fires and their lore, Sky Fires are seen as pagans amongst the Zangor warflocks, riding atop sinister discs of Zeech. They command almost as much awe as Zangor Shamans themselves, and often accompany the bestial mages into battle. They carry enormous bows, warped from the wood of divining rods and magical staffs, and from the air shoot hails of arrows into the ranks of enemies below. Compared to the other Zangors, the fate sense of Skyfires is greatly enhanced, allowing them at any given moment to perceive multiple potential futures, rendered mute by Zeech. A Skyfire can never speak of what it sees, but it's still able to use its knowledge to deadly effect. Peering into the depths of the future, a Skyfire lines up the events it wishes to unfold. The creature draws back its bowstring, nocks a fated arrow, then sets it upon its course. The missile flies through the air, every foreseen gust of wind steering it to where it's supposed to be, until it inevitably reaches its predestined target. With a wet thud, the arrow lances through gaps in armor, plating, sliding between ribs to puncture the vital internal organs. Before the violent amount of blood has erupted from the wound, the Skyfire has already lined up another shot and has chosen the arrow that will spell death for its next victim. So then, seeing what they do on the tabletop. So firstly, for 3 of them, it's going to cost you 200 points. You can take a max size unit of 9. You'll get no discount. They are not battle line, and they are just another unit. So 20 points more than Zangor Enlightened on discs each, because the Skyfires just standardly come on discs. You don't have a choice if they're on or off. So what you're going to get for the extra 20 points really is what it comes down to. So looking at their wheel stats, you get a 16-inch movement of 5+ save, bravery 6 and 4 wounds. It's the same there. Description: so a unit of Zangor Skyfires can have any number of models, each armed with an arrow of fate, vicious beak and bow staff. So the main weapon for the Zangor Skyfires, of course, is their missile weapon, which they're shooting. So that's going to be their arrow of fate, and that's why you take these guys. So it's 24-inch range, 1 attack, force to hit, freeze to wound, -1 rend, D3 damage. Not bad. Bear in mind their movement is 16, so the range on this weapon, as long as they can move to where they need to be, is 40-inch range on this weapon. Only 1 attack, but D3 damage. Okay, and then with the melee weapons, they have 3, so they have the bow staff. So this is a 1-inch range, 2 attacks, 5 to hit, 5 to wound, no rend, 1 damage. So yep, that's just a missile unit with firing with its bow, so no big surprise there. The vicious beak is a 1-inch range, 1 attack, 4 to hit, 5 to wound, no rend, 1 damage. And then the teeth and horns is a 1-inch range, D3 attacks, 4 to hit, freeze to wound, -1 rend, and D3 damage. So the same as we've seen before there. And then going on to the abilities, so they can fly, of course. As the Zangor Enlightened with the discs, they can fly also, obviously. And then the leader of the unit adds 1 to its hit rolls for attacks made with its arrow of fate. And then the Probabilities got guided by the future. So in the combat phase, you can reroll failed hit rolls and wound rolls for attacks made by this unit if no enemy units within 3 inches of this unit have already fought in that phase. So similar to the Zangor Enlightened, we can see with the Skyfires, their lore in the fluff, in the narrative, is coming to reflect to see what they do on the tabletop. So that's pretty cool, as it means if you want to attack with these guys first and then do a bit of damage, and you may be thinking, why would I want to send a missile unit into the combat? Why is that? It feels like a bit of a wasted ability. These guys can do quite a lot of damage in combat because of their discs, and that does not mean that they can go against other elite enemy units in combat, because unless you've got 9 of these in the unit, you really are going to struggle to win that fight. Okay, and then their last ability is Judgment from Afar. So a non-modified hit roll for an attack made with an arrow of fate inflicts D3 mortal wounds on the target, and the attack sequence ends. Do not make a wound or save roll. And then for their keywords, they have Chaos Gore, Beast of Chaos, Brayherd, Demon, Zeech, Arcanite, and Zangor Sky Fires. So, my overall thoughts. I like these guys. I prefer them more than the Enlightened. I know a lot of people like the Enlightened more, but for me, funny enough, as a death player who doesn't really have any shooting, apart from Mortek Crawlers, Catapults from Bone Reapers that I haven't really played with, the Zangor Sky Fires, because of their shooting, just makes them that better assassins. I would still use them to do the same job I would use to do the Enlightened, as a sort of an assassin squad going around killing those squishy enemy heroes and buggering up their synergy. Would I take them in units of 9? I don't know. I'll probably go like MSU with them, because I just don't think that... I don't feel like that's their job in the army, or that's not how I would use them. Doesn't mean I'm right, but I would use them as a scalpel rather than just a blunt instrument, which is the same with the Enlightened, but these guys just do the job better compared to the Enlightened, as if you don't make those charges or whatever, or you just can't get to those enemy units, you can shoot at them from 24 inches away. So that is my ultimate reason for why I think Zangor Sky Fires are better personally. Okay, so if you're really liking Zangors at the moment, because I hope so, as we've just been reviewing a couple of their War Scrolls and another one before that, now we're going to move on to the Zangor Shaymin, which, like I mentioned, if you want to take a lot of Zangors in your army, just the standard guys on foot, then you're going to want this guy potentially as a general to make them battle line, and maybe this guy is also going to help out your Sky Fires and your Enlightened, just to buff them up a little bit. So firstly, looking at his narrative, so the Zangor Shamans. Fell winds howl throughout the hinterlands, drifting clouds twist into animal shapes before devouring one another. Grand rivers flow backwards, their churning waters spitting forth mutated wildlife and screaming demonic entities. These omens and scores of others portend the coming of Zangor Shamans, most powerful Zeech's bestial creations. They are the leaders of the war flock that serve the great conspirator, blessed with magical abilities, oracle visions. Some are creatures born with the mark of Zeech emblazoned upon them. Others have their gifts bestowed upon them only after performing gruesome rituals, and others still are created from the devoured flesh of sorcerer mortals who delved too deep into profane practice. Yet, regardless of how they were formed, they are held highly by the beasts of chaos, and amongst the Zangors are seen as holding the greatest of boons, the ability to transmutate other mortal creatures into true children of chaos. And now to see what they're like in game. So Zangor Shaman, so obviously it's a leader, it's a hero, so you take men of 1, a max of 1 in a unit, and it's a leader, it's not battle line or anything, and it's going to cost you 150 points. Okay, so then to see what it's like in the rules, we've got a 16-inch movement, because of course it is on a disc of Zeech, a 5-up save, a bravery of 6 and 6 wounds. Looking at the description, a Zangor Shaman is a single model and is armed with a Staff of Change and Ritual Dagger. So let's have a look at those weapons. So melee weapons, so Staff of Change, 2-inch range, 1 attack, force to hit, freeze to wound, -1 rend, D3 damage. The Ritual Dagger, 1-inch range, 2 attacks, force to hit, force to wound, no render 1 damage, and Teeth and Horns from the disc. So this is a 1-inch range, D3 attacks, force to hit, freeze to wound, -1 rend, and D3 damage. Okay, so I would say pretty standard for a wizard, those attacks. I mean, he gets the Ritual Dagger, which is a couple extra attacks, but the Teeth and Horns of the disc is going to be the thing that can potentially do damage, but do not send this guy into combat unless there is a very specific reason why you would do so. And then going on to the abilities, so he has got Sorcerer Elixir. So Once per battle in your hero phase, this model can attempt to cast one additional spell. If it does so, you can reroll one or both the dice when you make a casting roll for the spell. Yep, that's good. Especially when you need to get that one spell off that game. The only thing with that is only once per game. But when you really need to get that spell off, it's going to help. Okay, and then you have Visions of the Future. So add one to hit rolls for attacks made with a friendly Zangor Sky Fire unit's Arrow of Fate, while that unit's wholly within 12 inches of a friendly Zangor Shaman. And you got Visions of the Past. So add one to hit rolls for attacks made with friendly Zangor Enlightened units, Zechian Spears and Vicious Beaks, while that unit is wholly within 12 inches of a friendly Zangor Shaman. Okay, so this is where I said it helps them out, because now your Sky Fires are hitting on 3 with those Arrows of Fate, and with your Zangor Enlightened, they are hitting on 3 as well with their Zechian Spear, which does make a big difference, especially with the rerolls they can do. And that's why I think it's good to have this guy along with that Assassination Squad. And like I say, if you take a smaller size unit or the Sky Fires or the Enlightened, you can help to make sure that everything will be wholly in range to get that bonus. Okay, and then the last thing it's got is magic. So this model is a wizard, and it can attempt to cast one spell in your hero phase, and attempt to unbind one spell in the enemy hero phase. It knows the Arcane Bolt, Mystic Shield, and Boon of Mutation spell. So the Boon of Mutation is its unique spell, and that has a casting value of 7. If successfully cast, pick an enemy unit within 18 inches of the caster and is visible to them. That unit suffers D3 mortal wounds. For each enemy model slain by these mortal wounds, you can add one Zangor model to a friendly Zangor unit. Each new Zangor model must be set up wholly within 12 inches of the caster and within 1 inch of the unit they are being added to. Okay, so you do need to again measure your ranges and stuff for this, but this guy is just a good caster for other spells. So say it's not a bad spell if you want to replenish your Zangors, but there isn't always going to be a reliable way to do it. That's all I say. But you know, the situation presents itself, then yeah, cool, go for it. So then the keywords we've got: Chaos Gore, Beast of Chaos, Brayherd, Demon, Zeech, Arcanite, Hero, Wizard, Zangor Shaman. That feels like the most we've done so far. So, with this guy, he is useful if you're taking your Zangor Sky Fires or Enlightened. Take this guy with you. He's a good caster. And if you're going to take Zangors on foot and you kind of want them as battle line, take this guy as your general to make them battle line. So now, moving away from Zeech, we are going to go back to the more traditional Beasts of Chaos, and we only have 2 more units to look at, and of course they are heroes, and we start to look at the heroes from the Zangor Shaman. So now, looking at another Shaman, this is going to be the Great Bray Shaman, and firstly, looking at the narratives. Serving as a baleful advisors to the Beast Lords, and profane preachers to the Gore King herds. Bray Shamans can be found at the heart of many Brayherds, like the rest of their kind. They have an insatiable appetite for carnage and desecration, yet their greatest strength is their ability to wield raw, destructive chaos energy. Right, they sound very interesting creatures, and then having a look to see what they're going to be like in the game. Why am I going to take a Great Bray Shaman? Let's see if we have the right answer for you. So, the Great Bray Shamans, they're not too expensive to be fair. You're looking at one model, obviously, as a leader, and it's going to cost you 100 points. So that's 50 points cheaper than the Zangor Shaman. So, where are its negatives in comparison? And really, that's what we're going to be looking at in this. So, looking at its wheel stats on its war scroll, it's got a 6-inch movement, a 6+ save, bravery 6 and 5 wounds. Its description says a Great Bray Shaman is a single model and armed with a fetish staff. So melee weapons is the fetish staff, of course. 2-inch range, 1 attack, force to hit, 3 to wound, -1 red and D3 damage. So very standard wizard attack there. Abilities infused with bestial figure. So at the start of your movement phase, add 3 to the move characteristics of models in friendly Brayherd units wholly within 12 inches of any friendly Great Bray Shamans until the end of that phase. Okay, I'll talk overall about the Great Bray Shaman at the end because I want to talk about that. And then the next thing he has is magic. So this model is a wizard. It can attempt to cast one spell in your hero phase and attempt to unbind one spell in the enemy hero phase. It knows the Arcane Bolt, Mystic Shield, and Devolve spells. So Devolve has a casting value of 7. If successfully cast, pick an enemy unit within 8 inches of the caster that is visible to them, and not within 3 inches of any friendly units. Your opponent must move that unit up to 2d6 so that each model in that unit ends its move as close as possible to a model from the friendly unit that was closest to it at the start of the move phase. Okay, so just to simplify that, pick an enemy unit. If you get it off, that enemy unit then goes towards one of your friendly units that you picked. As you sort of like, devolve them, making them go angry and more bestial and just want to get straight into the fight and going towards your nice killy stuff. So, their keyword is for the Great Bray Shaman, Chaos Gore, Beast of Chaos, Brayherd, Hero, Wizard, and Great Bray Shaman. What are my thoughts on this guy? So he's kind of just a standard caster. I think there are better spells for him to cast in the spell lore than the Devolve one, just because Devolve quite a high casting value of 7. Unless there's a certain situation, as always, that could be useful for it. So I did review those spell laws in my Army Part 1 video for the Beast of Chaos, so you can go check that out if you'd like to. And what I would say about this guy is, like I say, standard caster, but the really, really good reason to take this guy is because at the start of your movement phase, you can add that 3 inches to friendly Brayherd units. Remember, Brayherd is not everything in this book, but it is coincidentally everything that we're reviewing in this video. So if you got this far, it's everything we've reviewed so far and a Beast Lord what's coming up next. So quite a few stuff. The only thing I will mention as with this army, with the Brayherds, they are quite horde units. Not all of them, but some of them. So that does mean that you're not going to get loads wholly within 12 inches of one of these guys. So you may want to take more than the one Great Bray Shaman. I would take 2 at least just to get that buff, because then we're looking at things like, we'll look at your Zangors, for example. We said that they moved movement 14, didn't we? Now, if they had this, they would move 17. Let's say we've got the Great Bray Shaman who's still at the back next to your Herdstone, so not getting in the way of the enemy. And you've kept your Zangors there to do last minute, objective grabbing towards the end of the game. He will make them movement 17. And then if you want to spend a command point to make them automatically run that 6, they are then basic movement 24. And then they charge. So they could move somewhere up to, 36 inches if you're very lucky. But a basic 24 if you want to spend that command point to make them run 6. You could also do it for your Zangor Sky Fires or Enlightened on the discs to make them then movement, 19. It's just really good. And then it's almost like that's really good, plus this guy's a caster. And if you don't want to take it on those sort of more specific units I mentioned, if you want to take it just to get your mass blocks up the field, you certainly can do that for sure. All I would say is it would be, let's say you've got a block of, 40 guys, or 30 if it's Gores, or a best of Gores, whatever. I would say have 1 Great Bray Shaman per unit to do that. Don't try and think I can squeeze 2 units with it. You won't. As someone who's learning Nighthorn at the moment, there's a lot of abilities that are wholly within 12 inches, and what I've learned with that is it's really hard to try and get loads and loads of units crammed within that range. So just focus on 1, and then you won't accidentally go out of that range later on. You can really try and just focus to buff that 1 unit, essentially. So, yes, that is the Great Bray Shaman. I am a big fan of him, and there are some good spells in the lore for him to cast as well. And then it comes down to, is he as good as the, Zangor Shaman for 50 points less? It's not as simple as that. They do 2 different roles. Your Great Bray Shaman buffs your entire army within range of him to get the extra movement, and he's a caster as well. That's a standard caster. Your Zangor Shaman benefits your Zangor units by making them battle line if he's the general. He benefits your Enlightened units by getting that +1 to hit, and he benefits your Skyfire unit by getting that +1 to hit also. And he gets to, once per game, re-roll that casting roll. So they do different things. As a flat out who's a better caster, it's the Zangor Shaymin for that once per game re-roll to cast. But it's almost like you're taking the Great Ray Shaman for the movement over the casting potential. So they're both good units. And then with our final unit for the Brayherds, of course, has got to be the leader, which is the Beast Lords. So ferocious warriors, merciless warlords, and brutal tyrants of the lawless wilds. Beast Lords are the alpha beasts of the Brayherds, ruling through dominion and will and acts of brutal fury. They lead mass stampedes to crush whole nations before them and spread anarchy across the mortal realms. And now let's see what this guy is going to do on the table. And I have to say I'm quite excited to review his War Scroll because I've mentioned him a few times in the last few videos, which was the Allegiance abilities and the Great Phrase by saying, oh, if you take this guy, a certain Great Bray, and if you give this guy a certain artifact, you can really try and, help his attack potential, so then we can trigger his command ability. But I never went into his command ability, I just said it blew up and it did good things. But we are going to review it in a moment. So, surprisingly, for the big leader of a Brayherd focused army, this guy is only going to cost you 90 points for one model. Of course, the leader, and he is certainly not a behemoth. So, yeah, he's the cheapest out of the hero options of the Brayherds, but he's the main leader. So that's why some people go for, Xango Shamans and stuff as well. But let's not demoralise him too much. Let's have a look at his rules. So he's got a 6-inch movement, a 4+ save, bravery 7 and 5 wounds. His description: a Beast Lord is a single model and armed with a pair of Man Ripper axes. So let's have a look what the Man Ripper axes do. I think it's probably quite straightforward with the name, but nevertheless, let's look at their stats. So it's a melee weapon. So 1-inch range, 6 attacks, freeze to hit, freeze to wound, minus from rend and 1 damage. Nothing spectacular. Best thing about that is good amount of attacks and good hit into wound characteristics. Then the ability, so you've got dual axes. So you can reroll hit rolls of 1 for attacks made with paired Man or Ripper axes, which you have to have with this guy. So you will be getting that reroll. And then you've got Hatred of Heroes. So you can reroll failed wound rolls for attacks made by this model that target a hero. So you're going to want to send this guy against your enemy heroes, which is a little bit concerning because this guy is not the toughest. But then we go on to the command ability. So you can use this command ability in the combat phase if any attacks made by a friendly Beast Lord with this command ability resulted in an enemy model being slain that phase. If you do so, until the end of that phase, you can reroll wound rolls for attacks made by friendly Brayherd units wholly within 18 inches of that Beast Lord. If any attacks made by that Beast Lord resulted in an enemy hero or monster being slain that phase, you can reroll both hit and wound rolls for attacks made by friendly Brayherd units wholly within 18 inches of this Beast Lord instead. Okay, so essentially, you want your Beast Lord to kill an enemy model. If you get him to kill an enemy model, your friendly Brayherd units, wholly within 18 inches of him, are going to be re-rolling their hit rolls. If you get him to kill a hero or a monster, then it's re-rolling hit and wound rolls for those friendly units. This is what I was talking about when I've been reviewing part 1 and part 2 so far in this army series, is making this guy get this goddamn ability off, because his 6 attacks to do 1 damage with minus 1 rend is not really special, but we've looked at it and we can give him an extra damage through an artifact, and we can give him re-roll wound rolls of 1. So I know that doesn't sound amazing, however, we'll do a little recap. So it'll be 6 attacks, hitting on freeze, re-rolling 1s to hit, and then we'll be wounded on freeze, re-rolling 1s to wound, or re-rolling all failed wound rolls if the target's a hero, minus 1 rend, 2 damage. He's suddenly gone from being like basically the last thing you go to attack with in a turn to not being the first thing, unless there's a specific strategy you have in mind, but this guy's got 6 attacks, each doing 2 damage. You will take the enemy by surprise with this guy. And chances are, not a lot of people are used to fighting Beasts of Chaos. So they're not going to know this trick. And I'm not saying deceive your enemy and all that sort of thing, of course not. But it's just a little, you know, like this guy's a dark horse essentially. And if you can do that and then pop this ability, it's great. I have bigged up quite a lot, this ability, by saying, you know, I can make so much good things happen to, you know, your Brayherd, obviously. But it's not going to happen all the time. You know, it's going to be quite hard to get off. But essentially, it will reward you if you put the effort in. If you put in place ways to be able to make this happen, you will be rewarded, is what I will say behind it. Okay, and then we've got keywords is Chaos, Gore, Beast of Chaos, Brayherd, Hero, and it's a Beast Lord, obviously. So, yeah, I like the Beast Lord. I think he is good. Like I say, he rewards good gameplay. The enemy probably isn't going to try and snipe him off straight away because he's not going to be the biggest threat in your army. And that's why I also think he helps towards the Dark Horse to getting that command ability off. Even if he doesn't get that command ability off, just doesn't happen in the game, still chucking out a lot of 2 damage attacks. So, you know, you can make this guy a lot better. Of course, that means that you're not taking artifacts and other things, but you can make this guy pretty good for what he is, especially for a 90-point hero. Okay, guys, so with that is my part 3 army video done for the Beasts of Chaos. And this is the first one looking at the units. What I want to say at the end of this video, as I haven't said at the start, as when I was halfway through creating this video, I thought of an idea of sharing other people's work on their armies while I've been reviewing the units. So when I've been reviewing the units, so all things go well in the editing, you should see pictures of other people's, I don't know, Gores, Best of Gores, you know, Beast Lords, Shamans, all up there. And I thought that would be nicer than just having GW pictures, as it shows the community as a whole. I want to thank everyone I asked in the Beast of Chaos Facebook page who sent pictures. It's really kind of you guys, and I think it's a nice way to, yeah, share our community and stuff. So that's cool. And if you really liked anything I put up on their behalf, please let us know in the comments. And more than welcome, obviously, to go and check out that Facebook page to get more tips. Right, and with that, guys, I really hope you enjoyed this video. If so, please like, subscribe, and comment down below. It massively helps the channel. It's absolutely free to do so. And if you've got any questions, I will happily be able to try and help you out with that. Also, if you play the army or you've got experience with the army and there's anything you've agreed with me or disagreed with me and you think I've made some wrong points, instead of disliking the video, if you could please let me know in the comments down below. I'll be more than happy to essentially learn from you, learn from your experience, as that's what we're all here to do, is learn from each other, and it could have a really good chat. If you would like to support the channel a step further, I've got a Patreon, which is how the channel can survive and keeps it going, and there'll be a link for that at the top of the description down below. And on that note, I'd really like to thank my patrons. They do a fantastic job. Like I say, because of them, I can do this channel. If it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be able to do it. So they really are the lifeblood of the channel. Thank them very much for their support. And yeah, so guys, again, I thank you very much for watching this video. Until next time, remember to stay safe, wash your hands, stay hygienic, and of course remember, Nagash is all, and all is one in Nagash.